I covered my mouth and nose with a rag, trying unsuccessfully to block out the smell of decay and death. The dog we'd received a call about lay at my feet, covered in maggots and flies. Its head was submerged in the small river that flowed through town. He looked like he had been dead for about 3 or 4 days. This thing reeks. Jimmy spat on the ground next to me. I put the rag in away in defeat. The animals in town had been going crazy all week, attacking each other, running away from home, even turning on their owners. As the only animal control company in this town, Jimmy and I had our hands full. This dog was different though. I couldn't see any reason how it got here. How'd you reckon it died? Jimmy stared with disgust at the carcass. I pulled out my notepad and wrote down the time and place for our records. I don't know, drowning maybe. Jimmy raised an eyebrow at me. Drowning? In 6 inches of water? How'd that happen? I shook my head. I don't know. All I know is that with everything that's happened in the past few days, it wouldn't surprise me. Jimmy nodded thoughtfully, concern playing on his face. Don't I know it? Just this morning my neighbor was nearly trampled to death by his horse. Never had any problems like it before. I had heard plenty of those stories myself. I looked towards the road where our van was parked. The last light of the setting sun was hazy through the thick fog that had rolled into town a few days back. Well, let's get some gloves and see if we can't get this thing into some trash bags before dark. After a few minutes of working, we were able to get most of what was left of the dog into the thick plastic bags. I sat down in the passenger seat of the van as Jimmy threw the bag in the back. He came around and sat down heavily in the driver's seat. After a second, he cleared his throat. Listen, Frank, why don't you head home for the day? It's getting pretty late. Go spend some time with Brendan and Elena. They'd like that. I can take care of this dog. I looked at him sharply. I keep on telling you, Jim, I'm fine. Working helps me keep my mind off of it. Jimmy threw his hands up in frustration. Well, then that might be your problem then. It's been 3 months since the accident. Don't you think, Laura? Don't you bring her up, Jimmy. I told you never to talk about her. Jimmy's voice grew hard. So now I'm never allowed to talk about my sister, is that it? Just because you can't handle it? He shook his head. His next words came out softer. I know it's hard, Frank. No one should lose a spouse like you did. It's not right. But your kids need you. Go on home. I ground my teeth in frustration. Fine. If you want to get rid of this dog yourself, be my guest. Jimmy gave a wry smile. I guess I just didn't want to share the smell. Here, I'll drop you off at your place. He put the van into gear and started to drive off toward my house. We drove for a few minutes in silence, wheat fields whizzing by on either side. The sun had finally set over the horizon. Soon the streetlights of Main Street glared through the fog in the distance. Taylorsville was a tight-knit town, mostly farmers and ranchers, quiet folk working to make an honest living. When the middle of Main Street finally got a traffic light installed, it was the talk of the town for a month. We passed by the only drugstore, corner store, and gas station for about 20 miles as we made our way through town. As we left Main Street behind, I pulled out a lighter and lit a cigarette. Jimmy turned to me. You know, Frank, I think we... He cut off suddenly. His eyes stared up ahead. What in the hell is that? He pointed to a grassy field with some cows lying down in it. I blew out smoke and peered out at the window at the cows sitting in fog. I don't know, Jimmy. You know my vision isn't what it used to be. Jimmy's entire body was tense as a wound guitar string. He parked the van, his hands were shaking. I looked at him in surprise. Well, what is it? He shook his head, not speaking and not taking his eyes off the cows. I opened my door and circled around the front of the car. He hissed at me. "Frank, you get back in this car right now." I gave him a look and walked toward the field. I stopped mid-step. The cows were not lying down. The cows were dead. Each cow was covered in deep cuts, crisscrossing all over their hides. Every hair on my body stood up. The cow bodies were arranged in a circle with a single cow in the middle, completely dismembered. My cigarette fell from my numb fingers. I heard the sound of the van starting. I ran back to it. I jumped into my seat just as Jimmy took off. I sputtered until I found my voice. "What the hell? Who? What? How does that happen? What could have done that?" Jimmy shook his head. "I don't know, Frank. I've never seen anything like that before. They weren't even eaten, just all cut up." I saw the lone streetlight that marked the end of my driveway. Jimmy took the turn going 20 miles an hour. My house was a simple one-story farmhouse, same as most houses in the area. Jimmy drove the 150 feet or so to my house, gravel crunching under the tires. I jumped out and ran to my front door. I jumped through the door, Jimmy hot on my heels. I slammed the door shut behind us and locked it. I took a look at the inside of my house. The sound of the TV echoed through the hall. "Brendan, Elena, y'all home?" Elena walked from the kitchen with tears streaking her face. "Dad, Angel ran away. I can't find her anywhere." I ran up to her. "It's okay, baby girl. Where is your older brother?" She sniffled. "He's in his room playing with his toys." "Okay, great. Stay here with your uncle, okay? We'll find Angel, I promise. She's a smart dog." She nodded. I turned and ran down the hallway to my 8-year-old son's room. He was under his bed, curled up in a ball. "Brendan, you okay, buddy?" He looked at me with fear in his eyes. "There's something outside my window," he whispered. I felt my stomach turn to ice. I stood still for a moment. I thought about calling out to Jimmy, but decided against it. I walked towards his window where the blinds were pulled closed. I put my finger on the blinds and swallowed. I moved my eyes next to my finger and pulled down. I saw the road that we had just driven down. Then I swore under my breath. The streetlight that marked the end of my driveway was fuzzy and hazy in the thick fog. Underneath it stood a creature. It had 2 legs and was at least 9 feet tall. Its long arms almost seemed to touch the ground. Even my poor eyes saw the foot-long claws that extended diagonally from its arms. It had yellow eyes that were staring unblinking at the house. It did not move, yet I knew somehow that it saw me, more clearly than I saw it. I recoiled from the window as if I had been hit. I reached down and pulled Brendan out from under the bed and ran with him in my arms to the living room. I set him down on the couch and ran into the coat closet and pulled out my shotgun. I began to fumble with a box of shells. The TV lit up the otherwise dark room. Jimmy looked up from Elena in surprise. "What is it, Frank?" "There are monsters out there," Brendan said quietly. I dropped a shell that skittered across the floor. I went after it as I realized what my son had said. "Monsters. You saw more than one of those things, Brendan." Jimmy looked back and forth between us. "More than one what?" I grabbed Brendan, shaking him. "Did you see more than one?" He began to cry. "I saw them walking from the road towards the house." Suddenly, the TV cut to a public broadcasting announcement. It hissed and beeped and a voice rang out. "Stay tuned for important information." It returned to beeping and repeated the message. The screen went black, then displayed a new message in text across the screen. "Important announcement from the Department of Defense to all citizens. Open all doors and windows. Lay all weapons on the floor. You will not be harmed. Open all doors and windows. Do not speak with them when they enter. Do not move. Do not look at them. It is the only way." Jimmy stared numbly at the TV, now repeating the message. "What?" I saw shadows moving through the curtains on the windows at the back of the house. My hands trembled as I held the gun. Jimmy saw the shadows. Blood drained from his face. "Frank, you tell me what you saw right now." I heard a scuffling sound from the front of the house. The stairs leading up to my house creaked. The handle on my front door began to move.